Friendsify you want to watch super hit movie Pearl Harbor in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Film Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Pearl Harbor. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Film. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, Zol. So let's start the video. Pearl Harbor is a 2001 AIM Riken romantic war drama film directed by Michael Bay, produced by Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer, and written by Randall Wallace. Starring Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, Kate Beckinsale, Cuba Gooding Jr., Tom Sizemore, John Voight, Colm Feore, and Alec Baldwin, the film features a heavily fictionalized version of the attack on Pearl Harbor, focusing on a love story set amidst the lead-up to the attack, its aftermath, and the Doolittle raid. The film was a box office success, grossing $59 million in its opening weekend and $449.2 million worldwide, becoming the sixth highest grossing film of 2001. It received generally negative reviews from critics, although there was praise for the visual effects, action sequences, and music score. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning in the category of Best Sound Editing. It was also nominated for 6 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture. Plot: in 1923 in Tennessee, 2 best friends, Rafe McCauley and Danny Walker, play together in the back of an old biplane, pretending to be fighting airmen. In 1941, as World War II rages, Danny and Rafe are both first lieutenants under the command of Major Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle informs Rafe that he has been accepted into the Eagle Squadron, an RAF outfit for American pilots during the Battle of Britain. A nurse named Evelyn Johnson passes Rafe's medical exam despite his dyslexia, and the two strike up a relationship. 4 weeks later, Rafe and Evelyn, now deeply in love, enjoy an evening of dancing at a nightclub and later a jaunt in the New York harbor in a borrowed police boat. Rafe shocks Evelyn by saying that he has joined the Eagle Squadron and is leaving the next day. During a mission to intercept a Luftwaffe bombing raid, Rafe is shot down over the English Channel and is presumed killed in action. Danny and Evelyn mourn Rafe's death together, which spurs a romance between the two. Meanwhile, Japan prepares to attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet, deciding the best way to do so would be a decisive strike on the Pearl Harbor naval base. On the night of December 6th, Evelyn is shocked to discover Rafe standing outside her door, having survived his downing in the ensuing months trapped in Nazi-occupied France. Rafe, in turn, discovers Danny's romance with Evelyn and leaves for the hula bar, where he is welcomed back by his overjoyed fellow pilots. Danny finds a drunken Rafe in the bar with the intention of reconciling, but the two get into a fight. They drive away, avoiding being put in the brig when the military police arrive at the bar. The two fall asleep in Danny's car. Next morning on December 7th, the Imperial Japanese Navy begins its attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Pacific Fleet is severely damaged in the surprise attack, and most of the defending airfields are obliterated before they are able to launch fighters to defend the harbor. Rafe and Danny take off in P-40 fighter planes, and they shoot down several of the attacking planes. They later assist in the rescue of the crew of the capsized USS Oklahoma, but are too late to save the crew of the obliterated USS Arizona. The next day, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt delivers his Day of Infamy speech to the nation and requests that the U.S. Congress declare a state of war with the Empire of Japan. The survivors attend a memorial service to honor the numerous dead. Danny and Rafe are both assigned to travel stateside under Doolittle, though they are not told why. Before they leave, Evelyn reveals to Rafe that she is pregnant with Danny's child. Evelyn reassures Rafe she loved him in the past and will love him her whole life, but says she is ready to give Danny her whole heart and have their family together. Danny and Rafe are both promoted to captain and awarded the Silver Star for their actions at Pearl Harbor, and Doolittle asks them to volunteer for a secret mission. During the next 3 months, Rafe, Danny, and other pilots train for ultra-short takeoffs with specially modified B-25 Mitchell bombers. In April, the Raiders are sent toward Japan on board USS Hornet. Their mission is to bomb Tokyo, after which they will land in China. The mission is successful, but Rafe's and Danny's planes run out of fuel and crash in Japanese-occupied territory in China. A gunfight ensues between the Raiders and Japanese ground troops, and Danny is mortally wounded shielding Rafe before the group are rescued by Chinese soldiers. Desperately trying to will Danny back to life, Rafe tearfully reveals to Danny, "You're going to be a father." With his last breath, Danny replies, "No, you are." After the war, Rafe and Evelyn, now married, visit Danny's grave with Evelyn's son, named Danny after his biological father. Rafe then asks his stepson if he would like to go flying, and they fly off into the sunset in the old biplane that Rafe's father once owned.
Cast.
Fictional characters. Ben Affleck is the First Lieutenant Captain Rafe McCauley, a USAAC combat pilot. He is childhood friends with Danny Walker. Jesse James as young Rafe McCauley. Josh Hartnett as First Lieutenant Captain Danny Walker, a USAA combat pilot and Rafe's lifelong best friend. Riley McClendon as young Danny Walker. Kate Beckinsale as Lieutenant Evelyn Johnson, a nurse and Rafe and Danny's mutual love interest. Tom Sizemore as Sergeant Earl Cistern, the lead aircraft mechanic at Wheeler Airfield. Jamie King as Betty Bayer, a nurse at Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital and colleague of Evelyn's. Catherine Kellner as Barbara, a nurse at Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital and colleague of Evelyn's. Jennifer Garner as Sandra, a nurse at Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital and colleague of Evelyn's. Sarah Rue as Martha, a nurse at Pearl Harbor Naval Hospital and colleague of Evelyn's. William Lee Scott as First Lieutenant Billy Thompson, a USAAC combat pilot stationed at Wheeler Airfield. Ewan Bremner as First Lieutenant Red Winkle, a USAAC combat pilot stationed at Wheeler Airfield. Greg Zola as First Lieutenant Anthony Fusco, a USAAC combat pilot stationed at Wheeler Airfield. Michael Shannon as First Lieutenant Goose Wood, a USAAC combat pilot stationed at Wheeler Airfield. Matt Davis as Second Lieutenant Joe McKinnon, a USA combat pilot stationed at Wheeler Airfield. Dan Aykroyd as Captain Harold Thurman, a U.S. Naval Intelligence officer overseeing the monitoring of Japanese espionage efforts. He is a fictionalized composite of several real-world individuals, citation needed. Kim Coates as Lieutenant Jack Richards, a United States naval aviator who participates in the Doolittle Raid. Tony Curran as Ian, a Royal Air Force combat pilot in Eagle Squadron. Nicholas Farrell as a Royal Air Force squadron leader and combat pilot commanding the Eagle Squadron. William Fichtner as Mr. Walker, Danny's father. Steve Rankin as Mr. McCauley, Rafe's father. John Fujioka as General Nishikura, head of the Japanese Supreme War Council. He is a fictionalized composite of several real-world individuals. Citation needed. Leland Orser as Major Jackson, a USAA officer injured during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Ted McGinley as Major Newman, a U.S. Army officer. Andrew Briniarski as Joe, a crew member and amateur boxer aboard the USS West Virginia. Brandon Lozano as Baby Danny McCauley, Danny and Evelyn's son, and Rafe's stepson. Eric Christian Olsen as a B-25 gunner to McCauley. Sean Ferris as a B-25 gunner to Walker. Historical characters. Although not intended to be an entirely accurate depiction of events, the film includes portrayals of several historical figures. Cuba Gooding Jr. as Petty Officer Second Class Doris Miller, a messman aboard the USS West Virginia who operated anti-aircraft guns during the attack on Pearl Harbor. John Voight as President Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States. Colm Fiora as Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet and the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Mako as Kaigun Taisho, Admiral. Isoroku Yamamoto, Fleet Admiral of the Imperial Japanese Navy and mastermind of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Alec Baldwin as Major, later Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, USAF Commander and leader of the Doolittle Raid. Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa as Kaigan Chusa commander, Minoru Genda, lead planner of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Scott Wilson as General George C. Marshall, the U.S. Army's Chief of Staff. Graham Beckel as Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, a U.S. naval commander who later succeeded Kimmel as the Pacific Fleet's commander-in-chief. Tom Everett as Frank Knox, Secretary of the Navy. Thomas Arana as Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, Commander Cruiser Division 4. Peter Firth as Captain Mervyn S. Bennion, Commanding Officer of the USS West Virginia. Glenn Morshower as Vice Admiral William Halsey, Jr., Commander of Carrier Division 2 and the Aircraft Battle Force. Yuji Okamoto as Kaigun Dai, Lieutenant, Zenji Abe 1916-2007, bomber pilot in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Madison Mason as Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, Commander of Cruiser Division 5. Michael Seamus Wiles as Captain Mark Mitcher, Captain of the USS Hornet. Seth Sakai as Takeo Yoshikawa, Japanese spy. Production. The proposed budget of $208 million that Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer wanted was an area of contention with Walt Disney Studios executives, since a great deal of the budget was to be expended on production aspects. The budget was eventually reduced to $140 million. Even at the reduced budget, Disney managed to get many of the crew and others to defer some of their pay until the film grossed in the region of $140 million. This included the director of photography, the editor, production designer, and lighting director, and their departments, deferring around $5 to $10 million, as well as Panavision, Technicolor, and Industrial Light and Magic also agreeing to deferrals. Bay also deferred his salary, but he and Bruckheimer were the only ones to receive profit participation. Also controversial was the effort to change the film's rating from R to PG-13. Bay initially wanted to graphically portray the horrors of war and was not interested in primarily marketing the final product to a teen and young adult audience. However, even though he wanted to make an R-rated movie, Bay admitted that the problem was that young children would not be able to see it, and he felt that they should. As such, when he was ordered by Disney to make a PG-13 film, he didn't argue. As a compromise, he was allowed to release an R-rated director's cut on DVD later on in 2002. Budget fights continued throughout the planning of the film, with Bay walking on several occasions. Dick Cook, chairman of Disney at the time, said, "I think Pearl Harbor was one of the most difficult shoots of modern history." In order to recreate the atmosphere of pre-war Pearl Harbor, the producers staged the film in Hawaii and used current naval facilities. Many active-duty military members stationed in Hawaii and members of the local population served as extras during the filming. The set at Rosarito Beach in the Mexican state of Baja California was used for scale model work as required. Formerly the set of Titanic, 1997, Rosarito was the ideal location to recreate the death throes of the battleships in the Pearl Harbor attack. A large-scale model of the bow section of USS Oklahoma, mounted on the world's largest gimbal, produced an authentic rolling and submerging of the doomed battleship. Production engineer Nigel Phelps stated that the sequence of the ship rolling out of the water and slapping down would involve one of the biggest set elements to be staged. Matched with computer-generated imagery, the action had to reflect precision and accuracy throughout. Production was due to commence April 8, 2000, for 85 days. Michael Fassbender read for the part of Rafe. Fassbender said that Disney sent him a really nice note telling him that he didn't get the part. Charlize Theron turned down a role in the film so that she could star in Sweet November. The vessel most seen in the movie was USS Lexington, representing both USS Hornet and a Japanese carrier. All aircraft takeoffs during the movie were filmed on board the Lexington, a museum ship in Corpus Christi, Texas. The aircraft on display were removed for filming and were replaced with film aircraft as well as World War II anti-aircraft turrets. Other ships used in filler scenes included USS Hornet and USS Constellation during filming for the carrier sequences. Filming was also done on board the museum battleship USS Texas, located near Houston, Texas. The Naval Historical Center of the United States Army was involved in the production of the film. The center suggested changing the depiction of Doolittle, who they considered to be written as a boorish, oafish guy. This recommendation was accepted. Release, marketing. The teaser trailer premiered in June 2000 in front of the Patriots theatrical screenings. Disney premiered the film at Pearl Harbor itself, aboard the active nuclear aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis, which made a 6-day trip from San Diego to serve as the world's largest and most expensive outdoor theater. More than 2,000 people attended the premiere on the Stennis, which had special grandstand seating and one of the world's largest movie screens assembled on the flight deck. The guests included various Hawaii political leaders, most of the lead actors from the film, and over 500 news media from around the world that Disney flew in to cover the event. The party was estimated to have cost Disney $5 million. Box office. During its opening weekend, Pearl Harbor generated a total of $59 million, then made $75.1 million during its first 4 days. At the time, it achieved the second highest Memorial Day weekend gross behind The Lost World Jurassic Park. The film also had the fourth highest opening weekend after the latter film, The Mummy Returns and Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. For 15 years, it would have the highest opening weekend for a Ben Affleck film until 2016, when Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice surpassed it. When the film was released, it topped the box office, knocking out Shrek. It earned $30 million during its second weekend, while staying at the number one spot ahead of the latter film, Moulin Rouge, and The Animal. This was the most recent film to top the box office for multiple weeks until that August when American Pie 2 became the next one to do so. The film would then drop into third place behind Swordfish and Shrek, making $14.9 million. In Japan, the film opened on 424 screens and grossed $7.2 million in its opening weekend, including $1.6 million in previews, a record for Buena Vista International in Japan, and the sixth highest opening of all time. Meanwhile, Pearl Harbor generated a 3-day gross of $4.5 million in the United Kingdom, becoming the country's fourth highest June opening weekend, behind Batman and Robin, The Matrix, and The Mummy. It had a record opening in China, grossing $3.9 million in 6 days. The film also made $2.5 million in Mexico, making it the fifth highest opening for a live-action film in the country, trailing The Phantom Menace, The Mummy Returns, Mission Impossible 2, and Godzilla. Making $870,000, it was Argentina's second highest opening of 2001, after Hannibal. Pearl Harbor grossed $198,544 at the U.S. and Canadian box office and $250,678,390 overseas for a worldwide total of $449,020,945, making this the sixth highest grossing film of 2001. It is also the third highest grossing romantic drama film of all time as of January 2013, behind Titanic and Ghost. Home media. Pearl Harbor was released on VHS and DVD on December 4, 2001 by Buena Vista Home Entertainment under the Touchstone home video label. Both home video versions are THX certified, featuring a historical documentary and a music video, while also having the film split into 2 parts. The VHS release has 2 separate cassettes and comes with widescreen and full-screen versions. As for the DVD release, it includes 2 separate discs that feature the first and second halves of the film, along with Dolby headphone and DTS audio tracks. In its first week, the film sold more than 7 million units and made more than $130 million in retail sales. On July 2, 2002, Buena Vista Home Entertainment released the film on an R-rated 4-disc director's cut DVD, which included about a minute of additional footage. This release also features 3 audio commentaries. The first one has Michael Bay and Janine Basinger, which was recorded 250 hours after the September 11 attacks. At the 5th Annual DVD Awards, Pearl Harbor won the Best Audio Presentation category, tying with Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Reception. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, Pearl Harbor holds an approval rating of 24% based on 194 reviews, with an average rating of 4.5 for 10. The site's critical consensus reads, Pearl Harbor tries to be the Titanic of war movies, but it's just a tedious romance filled with laughably bad dialogue. The 40-minute action sequence is spectacular, though. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 44 out of 100 based on 35 reviews, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film a grade A- on scale of A to F. Chicago Sun-Times critic Roger Ebert gave the film 1.5 stars, writing, "Pearl Harbor is a 2-hour movie squeezed into 3 hours about how, on December 7, 1941, the Japanese staged a surprise attack on an American love triangle. Its centerpiece is 40 minutes of redundant special effects surrounded by a love story of stunning banality. The film has been directed without grace, vision, or originality, and although you may walk out quoting lines of dialogue, it will not be because you admire them." Ebert also criticized the liberties the film took with historical facts. There is no sense of history, strategy, or context. According to this movie, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor because America cut off its oil supply, and they were down to an 18-month reserve. Would going to war restore the fuel sources? Did they perhaps also have imperialist designs? Movie doesn't say. In his later Great Movies essay on Lawrence of Arabia, Ebert likewise wrote, "What you realize watching Lawrence of Arabia is that the word epic refers not to the cost or the elaborate production, but to the size of the ideas and vision. Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, didn't cost as much as the catering in Pearl Harbor, but it is an epic, and Pearl Harbor is not." Ed Gonzalez of Slant Magazine gave the film 1 out of 4 stars and wrote, "Middlingly racist, humorless, and downright inept, Pearl Harbor is solely for fans of fireworks factories." A.O. Scott of the New York Times wrote, "Nearly every line of the script drops from the actors' mouths with the leaden clank of exposition, timed with bad sitcom beats." Mike Clark of USA Today gave the film 2 out of 4 stars and wrote, "Ships, planes, and water combust and collide in Pearl Harbor, but nothing else does in one of the wimpiest wartime romances ever filmed." In his review for the Washington Post, Desson Howe wrote, "Although this Walt Disney movie is based, inspired, and even partially informed by a real event referred to as Pearl Harbor, the movie is actually based on the movies Top Gun, Titanic, and Saving Private Ryan. Don't get confused." Peter Travers of Rolling Stone magazine wrote, "Affleck, Hartnett, and Beckinsale, a British actress without a single worthy line to wrap her credible American accent around, are attractive actors, but they can't animate this moldy romantic triangle." Time magazine's Richard Schickel criticized the love triangle. "It requires a lot of patience for an audience to sit through the dithering. They're nice kids and all that, but they don't exactly claw madly at one another. It's as if they know that someday they're going to be part of the greatest generation and don't want to offend Tom Brokaw. Besides, mega history and personal history never integrate here." Robert W. Butler of the Kansas City Star wrote, "The dialogue is so unrelentingly banal as to make one reconsider whether James Cameron's writing on Titanic was really all that bad." Entertainment Weekly was more positive, giving the film a B- rating, and Owen Gleiberman praised the Pearl Harbor attack sequence. "Bay's staging is spectacular, but also honorable in its scary, hurtling exactitude. There are startling point-of-view shots of torpedoes dropping into the water and speeding toward their targets, and though Bay visualizes it all with a minimum of graphic carnage, he invites us to register the terror of the men standing helplessly on deck, the horrifying split-second deliverance as bodies go flying and explosions reduce entire battleships to liquid walls of collapsing metal." In his review for the New York Observer, Andrew Saris wrote, "Here is the ironic twist in my acceptance of Pearl Harbor. The parts I liked most are the parts before and after the digital destruction of Pearl Harbor by the Japanese carrier planes, and felt that Pearl Harbor is not so much about World War II as it is about movies about World War II. And what's wrong with that?" Critics in Japan received the film more positively than in most countries, with one likening it to Gone with the Wind set during World War II, and another describing it as more realistic than Tora. In 2023, Rolling Stone cited Bay's direction of Pearl Harbor as one of the 50 worst decisions in film history, Andy Green described it as a less successful attempt to replicate the success of Titanic and Bay's previous film, Armageddon. Accolades. The film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, winning in the category of Best Sound Editing. It was also nominated for 6 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture. This marked the first occurrence of a Worst Picture-nominated film winning an Academy Award. It is also the only film directed by Bay to win an Academy Award. Historical accuracy. Like many historical dramas, Pearl Harbor provoked debate about the artistic license taken by its producers and director. National Geographic Channel produced a documentary called Beyond the Movie, Pearl Harbor, detailing some of the ways that the film's final cut didn't reflect all the attack's facts or represent them all accurately. The film was ranked number 3 on CareerAfterMilitary.com's 10 most inaccurate military movies ever made, which also included The Patriot, The Hurt Locker, U-571, The Green Berets, Wind Talkers, Battle of the Bulge, Red Tails, Enemy at the Gates, and Flyboys on its list of falsified war movie productions. Many Pearl Harbor survivors dismissed the film as grossly inaccurate and pure Hollywood. In an interview done by Frank Weta, producer Jerry Bruckheimer was quoted saying, "We tried to be accurate, but it's certainly not meant to be a history lesson." Historian Lawrence Seward's review is particularly detailed as to the major factual misrepresentations of the film and the negative impact they have even on an entertainment film, as he notes that the very name of the film implies that audiences will be witnessing a historic event, accurately rendered. The Battle of Britain had already ended in October 1940, whereas the film has it still happening in early 1941 with dogfights over the English Channel. Critics decried the use of fictional replacements for real people, declaring that Pearl Harbor was an abuse of artistic license. The roles the 2 male leads have in the attack sequence are analogous to the real historical deeds of United States Army Air Force's 2nd Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth M. Taylor, who took to the skies in P-40 Warhawk aircraft during the Japanese attack, and together claimed 6 Japanese aircraft and a few probables. Taylor called the film a piece of trash, over-sensationalized and distorted. The scene following the attack on Pearl Harbor, where President Roosevelt demands an immediate retaliatory strike on the soil of Japan, did not happen as portrayed in the film. Admiral Chester Nimitz and General George Marshall are seen denying the possibility of an aerial attack on Japan, but in real life they actually advocated such a strike. Another inconsistency in this scene is when President Roosevelt, who was at this time in his life stricken and confined to a wheelchair due to his disease, Guillain-Barré syndrome or polio, is able to stand up to challenge his staff's distrust in a strike on Japan, which never really happened. The portrayal of the planning of the Doolittle raid, the air raid itself, and the raid's aftermath is considered one of the most historically inaccurate portions of the film. In the film, Jimmy Doolittle and the rest of the Doolittle Raiders had to launch from USS Hornet 624 miles off the Japanese coast, and after being spotted by a few Japanese patrol boats. In actuality, the Doolittle Raiders had to launch 650 miles off the Japanese coast, and after being spotted by only 1 Japanese patrol boat. The film shows all the bombers arriving in formation over Japan, despite the real concerns over fuel when the planes have to take off prematurely. It actually took 1 hour to launch the 16 planes, each setting out on its own course, and at no time did the planes flew together before, during, or after the attack. In the film, the only raiders shown in the raid are depicted as dropping their bombs on Tokyo, with some of the bomb blasts obliterating entire buildings. In actuality, the Doolittle Raiders did bomb Tokyo, but also targeted 3 other industrial cities, and the damage inflicted was minimal. Prior to the raid, a chalkboard containing plans for the raid does accurately reflect other destination cities, but this is mostly obscured from view and never discussed in the dialogue. The firefight with Japanese soldiers after the raiders crash land in China is entirely fictionalized, whereas the actual smuggling of the pilots back to the United States was omitted. Soundtrack. The soundtrack to Pearl Harbor on Hollywood Records was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score. Moulin Rouge won. The original score was composed by Hans Zimmer. The song There You'll Be was nominated for the Academy Award and Golden Globe Award for Best Original Song. Pearl Harbor is a 2-hour movie squeezed into 3 hours about how on December 7, 1941, the Japanese staged a surprise attack on an American love triangle. Its centerpiece is 40 minutes of redundant special effects, surrounded by a love story of stunning banality. The film has been directed without grace, vision, or originality, and although you may walk out quoting lines of dialogue, it will not be because you admire them. The filmmakers seem to have aimed the film at an audience that may not have heard of Pearl Harbor or perhaps even of World War II. This is the Our Weekly Reader version. If you have the slightest knowledge of the events in the film, you will know more than it can tell you. There is no sense of history, strategy, or context. According to this movie, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor because America cut off its oil supply and they were down to an 18-month reserve. Would going to war restore the fuel sources? Did they perhaps also have imperialist designs? Movie doesn't say. So shaky is the film's history that at the end, when Jimmy Doolittle's Tokyo Raiders crash land in China, they're shot at by Japanese patrols with only a murky, throwaway explanation about the Sino-Japanese War already underway. I predict some viewers will leave the theater sincerely confused about why there were Japanese in China. As for the movie's portrait of the Japanese themselves, it is so oblique that Japanese audiences will find little to complain about, apart from the fact that they play such a small role in their own raid. There are several scenes where the Japanese high command debates military tactics, but all of their dialogue is strictly expository. They state facts but do not emerge with personalities or passions. Only Admiral Yamamoto, Mako, is seen as an individual, and his dialogue seems to have been singled out with the hindsight of history. Congratulated on a brilliant raid, he demurs. A brilliant man would find a way not to fight a war. And later, I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant. Do you imagine at any point the Japanese high command engaged in the 1941 Japanese equivalent of exchanging high fives and shouting yes while pumping their fists in the air? Not in this movie, where the Japanese seem to have been melancholy even at the time about the regrettable need to play such a negative role in such a positive Hollywood film. The American side of the story centers on two childhood friends from Tennessee, with the standard issue screenplay names Rafe McCauley, Ben Affleck, and Danny Walker, Josh Hartnett. They enter the Army Air Corps and both fall in love with the same nurse, Evelyn Johnson, Kate Beckinsale. First, Rafe falls for her, and then after he is reported dead, Danny. Their first date is subtitled 3 Months Later, and ends with Danny, having apparently read the subtitle, telling Evelyn, "Don't let it be 3 months before I see you again, okay?" That gets almost as big a laugh as her line to Rafe, "I'm going to give Danny my whole heart, but I don't think I'll ever look at another sunset without thinking of you." That kind of bad laugh would have been sidestepped in a more literate screenplay, but our hopes are not high after an early newsreel report that the Germans are bombing downtown London. A difficult target, since although there is such a place as central London, at no time in 2,000 years has London ever had anything described by anybody as a downtown. There is not a shred of conviction or chemistry in the love triangle, which results after Rafe returns alive to Hawaii shortly before the raid on Pearl Harbor and is angry at Evelyn for falling in love with Danny, inspiring her timeless line, "I didn't even know until the day you turned up alive, and then all this happened." Evelyn is a hero in the aftermath of the raid, performing triage by using her lipstick to separate the wounded who should be treated from those left to die. In a pointless stylistic choice, director Michael Bay and cinematographer John Schwartzman shoot some of the hospital scenes in soft focus, some in sharp focus, some blurred. Why? I understand it's to obscure details deemed too gory for the PG-13 rating. Why should the carnage at Pearl Harbor be toned down to PG-13 in the first place? In the newsreel sequences, the movie fades in and out of black and white with almost amusing haste, while the newsreel announcer sounds not like a period voice, but like a top 40 DJ in an echo chamber. The most involving material in the film comes at the end, when Jimmy Doolittle, Alec Baldwin, leads his famous raid on Tokyo, flying army bombers off the decks of Navy carriers and hoping to crash land in China. He and his men were heroes, and their story would make a good movie, and indeed has, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. Another hero in the movie is the African-American cook, Dory Miller, Cuba Gooding Jr., who because of his race was not allowed to touch a gun in the racist pre-war Navy, but opens fire during the raid, shoots down 2 planes, and saves the life of his captain. He's shown getting a medal. Nice to see an African-American in the movie. But the almost total absence of Asians in 1941 Hawaii is inexplicable. As for the raid itself, a little goes a long way. What is the point, really, of more than half an hour of planes bombing ships, of explosions and fireballs, of roars on the soundtrack and bodies flying through the air, and people running away from fighters that are strafing them? How can it be entertaining or moving when it's simply about the most appalling slaughter? Why do the filmmakers think we want to see this, unrelieved by intelligence, viewpoint, or insight? It was a terrible, terrible day. 3,000 died in all. This is not a movie about them. It is an unremarkable action movie. Pearl Harbor supplies the subject, but not the inspiration. Some films are great. Some have greatness thrust upon them, but occasionally, greatness is just a big bowl of Hollywood hogwash. Remember Demetrius and the Gladiators, with the hulking Victor Mature getting God as others get stomach acid? Or The Conqueror, with John Wayne as a bow-legged Genghis Khan? Or The Black Knight, with Alan Ladd clanking round submerged in his suit of armor like a small sardine in a big can? Once seen, all of them never forgotten. Memorable hilarities on the wilder shores of kitsch. And now there is Pearl Harbor. Everyone thus far has been so busy hurling rotten tomatoes or erudite theses on the decline of Western civilization through Michael Bay's window that you may, perhaps, not have realized what a writhing, gigglesome joy he's produced. 180 minutes and $140 million, which go straight through the pain barrier into movie legend. This isn't some average, boring disaster. It's a stupendous, life-enhancing disaster, a ship lost gloriously with all hands and reputations. There are no mysteries about its genesis. Somebody saw Titanic, counted the box office, and decided to take the same powder. Can anyone please find me another global foul-up? Dunkirk, sir? Nah, too tiny, too Brit. Waterloo, sir? Nah, too European. Pearl Harbor? But that was our all-American foul-up. Where's the patriotism in that? Hang on, though. What if we make it a romance with some young hunk like Leonardo and an English rose like that Winslet dame, though, maybe, you know? A bit thinner? Then love could conquer all and we could hang out the flags at the end. Good thinking, sir. And so, after a Disney investment roughly equaling the GDP of 6 African states, it came to pass. Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett are boyhood buddies from the Boondocks turned fighter aces kicking their heels in Hawaii. Ben falls for Kate Beckinsale, a nurse who seems to double as a stick insect fashion model, but promptly heads off to the white cliffs of Dover in search of a little action. Are there any more in America like you? Asks a wistful RAF captain. Alas, no, and anyway, he is soon missing in action. Best friend Josh tumbles Kate on a bed of parachutes and produces a symptomless pregnancy. But who's that coming round the palm trees? Ben is not dead. He is alive. Meanwhile, there seem to be rather a lot of planes flying early this morning. Implausible? Not as good as that. Randall Wallace's galumphing screenplay doesn't even try for plausibility. Kate meets Ben, giving him an eye test, but Ben's dyslexic, so he has to charm a pass mark out of her. 15 seconds later, he's writing her long, pining letters only Barbara Cartland could love, a miracle cure only rivaled by miracle stupidity. His sudden reappearance back from the dead in the English Channel presupposes that he couldn't find a telephone box. Still, at least there is one consistent and original theme in there somewhere. This is the first Pacific War movie where you want the Japanese to win. That's not just because Titanic did so stunningly in the Tokyo market that Jerry Bruckheimer and Bay have to airbrush little local difficulties like the invasion of China away. nor because Admiral Yamamoto stalks the decks of his aircraft carrier like a wizened samurai pursued by avenging subtitles. If we achieve surprise, the Americans will offer little resistance. That's brilliant, Admiral. No, a brilliant man would find a way not to fight a war. Rather, the Japanese deserve to triumph on merit. They're putting in the time. Their pilots run disciplined to their planes. Their leaders never sleep. Meanwhile, the boys and girls back at Pacific Fleet HQ are playing Animal House. They never do any work, apart from a few unauthorized joy flights with a dame on their lap. They booze and flirt and doss around wearing obnoxious flowered shirts. Our heroes are blearily soused out of their minds as rising sun hordes sweep overhead. Their doctors come over queasy at the sight of blood. Their generals are on the golf course. As torpedoes whiz through the harbor, spelling digital obliteration, no one in the next boat seems to wake up. Nobody, perhaps reinforcing Affleck, thinks to pick up a telephone. Dozy, thick, shambolic, natural victims in a world crying out for national missile defense. The sole voice of intelligence at the top tables is played, not for laughs, by Dan Aykroyd. They're going to hit us where it hurts us most, he observes presciently. Got any evidence? Oh, all-seeing one? Well, it's what I would do. Most telling of the lot, perhaps, is the casting of John Voight, pavilioned in latex, as President Roosevelt. He always plays villains these days. It's how you pay the mortgage at his age. Be fair, in charity to the cast. They're cardboard characters given cardboard to mouth. Affleck's flat physog, filmed in malignant close-up, registers only alarm and constipation. Beckinsale's controlled intelligence doesn't remotely equip her for innocent warmth. You spend most of the time admiring her lacquered lips and bridge work. Hartnett, required only to look constantly hangdog, survives best because his part is hangdog in, hangdog out. Cuba Gooding Jr. is the hapless black in this minstrel show. There are 40 minutes of special effects which, too, have a slightly cardboard feel, a bloodless computer pump-ing. Richard Fleischer's Tora did them just as spectacularly and more realistically 30 years back. Hey, sir, we gotta end on an up. There ain't nothing to feel happy-sad about here. And so at the close, Ben and Josh are picked by Alec Baldwin, a legend called Doolittle, to go on the raid which dropped a few bombs on Tokyo. We have only awakened the sleeping giant, proclaims a fearful Yamamoto. One hero perishes, one comes home. Kate gets out her lipstick. As travesties go, it's huge fun. Some of my chums in the critics circle are beating their breasts with disgust, looking at the first zillion-dollar weekend take in America and announcing the death of cinema as art. Cheer up, chaps. The popcorn legions know what they're doing. Eat your pectorals out, Victor Mature. This is so bad, it's good. This is a real disaster. To think of Uber producer Jerry Bruckheimer and action director Michael Bay is to be reminded of popcorn and eye candy trifles like The Rock and Armageddon, movies where flashy special effects and lobotomized scripts are arguably assets. The pairing of Bruckheimer and Bay does not provoke thoughts of a serious epic set against a grand historical backdrop, and Pearl Harbor illustrates why this is the case. It's a mystery why, with $135 million being spent on this motion picture, a few dollars couldn't have been lavished on the screenplay. The writing, credited to Braveheart scribe Randall Wallace, isn't just mediocre, it's embarrassingly bad. This movie has more howlers than the average comedy, and all of those lines are, of course, unintentionally funny. Perhaps one of the reasons I experienced such an unexpectedly negative reaction while watching Pearl Harbor is that the movie had the potential to be so much better. The cast is solid, the special effects are first-rate, and the subject is inherently compelling. The events which shattered the stillness of the morning of December 7, 1941, obsess history buffs to this day. Aside from 1970's Tora, no feature film has effectively captured the scope of the Japanese offensive of that day. Sadly, while Pearl Harbor presents a credible, digitally enhanced recreation of the attack, that's one of the few things the movie accomplishes. From start to finish, the centerpiece action takes only 35 minutes, or about 20% of the overall running time. Pearl Harbor is a Titanic wannabe that falls far short of the mark. Even those who don't appreciate Titanic are likely to acknowledge how much better it is than Pearl Harbor on nearly every level. Both films suffer from areas of historical error, but while Titanic manages to overcome its factual discrepancies by presenting an absorbing spectacle, Pearl Harbor sinks beneath the weight of its own split personality. Ponderous and self-important on one hand, pandering to an uneducated audience on the other. Plus, while Titanic earns its 3+ hour running length, Pearl Harbor doesn't. It has to incorporate a lame prologue and out-of-place third act in order to pad things out to a final screen time of 183 minutes. Historically, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor represented one of the key actions of World War II because it sucked the United States into the war. The attack, devised by Admiral Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese fleet, brought the brunt of the Japanese military power to bear on Hawaii. In a 2-hour period, 18 ships were sunk or badly damaged, including the Arizona, which split in two, then went under, the West Virginia, and the Oklahoma, which rolled over. 188 planes were destroyed, with an additional 159 damaged, and more than 3,500 Americans were killed or wounded. Fortunately for the American Pacific Fleet, the 3 aircraft carriers based at Pearl Harbor were out to sea at the time of the attack. On the day after, President Roosevelt stood before Congress, and after declaring December 7, 1941 to be a date that will live in infamy, he urged that a declaration of war be issued. Meanwhile, half a world away, the Japanese celebrated their victory, but Yamamoto wondered out loud whether the attack had been the best thing, saying, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Indeed, the Pearl Harbor air raid united the American people in a way that no other event in the 20th century did. Pearl Harbor depicts all of this, and more. The third act is an account of Dolittle's April 1942 bombing raid on Tokyo, launched from the Hornet, but does so in a slapdash fashion. It is possible to argue that Pearl Harbor's agenda is too ambitious for a single motion picture. Tell a love story, represent the historical situation, and offer a concluding catharsis that does not come naturally to the tale of what transpired at Pearl Harbor. The movie does many things, but only succeeds in doing a few of them well. As a history lesson, Pearl Harbor can best be described as incomplete and perfunctory. This would easily be forgivable if the picture had more to offer in other areas. Unfortunately, it doesn't. So the film's flawed historical context becomes its key selling point. The story is presented from the point of view of 3 central characters: bomber pilots Rafe McCauley, Ben Affleck, and Danny Walker, Josh Hartnett, and nurse Evelyn Johnson, Kate Beckinsale, the woman who loves and is loved by these 2 best friends. Rafe and Danny are closer than brothers until Evelyn comes between them. But before the romantic triangle can be sorted out, Pearl Harbor is attacked, and all 3 are called to perform acts of outrageous heroism, much as one would expect from men and women populating any Jerry Bruckheimer, Michael Bay film. The central problem with the film is not the reliance upon special effects or the overlong running time, it's the lack of dramatic tension and empathy for the protagonists. Largely because it employs cliches and contrivances to push the narrative forward, the screenplay never draws us into the characters' world, nor does it involve us in their romance, certainly not the way Titanic does. Shortcuts like montages and flashbacks are used to depict the depth of the characters' feelings for one another. From the beginning, we are subjected to a series of badly conceived and executed scenes, such as one in which 2 kids accidentally head down a runway in a crop dusting plane, shades of Anakin's experience in The Phantom Menace, or another in which an 8-year-old hits an adult with a 4x4. The dialogue is equally atrocious. People say things like, "I'm not anxious to die, just anxious to matter." And there's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. And we're stuck with a soap opera-style storyline that features brawling as a form of male bonding, people returning from the dead, unexpected pregnancies, and a woman torn between 2 lovers. Through it all, we are strangely detached from the situation. Until the attack comes, Pearl Harbor is not an involving experience. For about 35 minutes, as the bombs are falling and things are blowing up, Pearl Harbor takes off, Suddenly, we're no longer stuck with dumb character interaction and painful dialogue. Instead, we can sit back and watch the devastation unfold. It's impressive, especially when the Arizona goes down. But when it comes to an end and the last torpedo has been launched, the movie still has nearly an hour to go. That isn't a good thing, because then the characters start surfacing again, and they're not as interesting as a sinking ship or an exploding plane. I fault the script and the director, who uses frequent cuts, lots of slow-motion shots, and even smears Vaseline on the lens for certain scenes, not the actors. Kate Beckinsale and Alec Baldwin, playing General Dolittle, give especially strong performances. It's worth noting that Beckinsale is dressed and shot, using backlighting and soft focus, in a way that makes her look like a female screen icon of the 40s. Affleck and Hartnett are fine, although Affleck comes across as a little too cocky to be truly likable. Cuba Gooding Jr. has a supporting role as a cook who gets involved in the action. The character has no backstory. I guess we're supposed to assume it's similar to that of the hero Gooding portrayed in Men of Honor. And Jon Voight offers a credible Franklin Roosevelt. While Pearl Harbor doesn't have any big-name A-list stars, the budget couldn't support them, there are a lot of familiar faces, including those of Colm Feore as Admiral Kimmel, Tom Sizemore as the mechanic Earl, Mako Admiral Yamamoto, and Dan Aykroyd Captain Thurman, the tactical expert. You know a movie is being ineffective when you're thinking about all the things it's doing wrong before 5 minutes have elapsed. Pearl Harbor is designed as a crowd pleaser, and as is too often the case with that sort of a motion picture, it values good-looking sets, attractive performers, and flashy special effects over an intelligent screenplay. And despite trying, Pearl Harbor can't even follow the Titanic formula properly. This movie is not completely without value, but there's a lot of subpar dross to be sifted through to get to the worthwhile material. If you're really interested in what happened at Pearl Harbor, rent Tora, or one of many detailed documentaries. If you crave a tragic romance, Titanic is one of many choices. Pearl Harbor only shines when the special effects eclipse the human element. Better to wait until it's available on video and you have the option of using a fast-forward button. Here is how the love triangle between two pilots, Rafe McCauley, Ben Affleck, and his best buddy, Danny Walker, Josh Hartnett, and a nurse, Evelyn Johnson, Kate Beckinsale, plays out in Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor, which is now 20 years away from 25 May 2001, a day that will live in mild ignominy. Spoilers, obviously, for those who haven't seen it. Rafe and Evelyn fall in love in early 1941, before America has entered the Second World War. They enjoy what Evelyn describes as the most romantic 4 weeks and 2 days of my life. Unbeknown to either Evelyn or Danny, Rafe has volunteered for the Eagle Squadron, an RAF outfit for Americans to help the British fight the Nazis. They do not have sex. Rafe wants to save that for when he gets back. Rafe does not get back. Not yet, anyway. His plane gets shot down in the Atlantic and he is presumed dead. Danny and Evelyn, both now stationed in a sleepy little naval paradise called Pearl Harbor, are devastated by the news. Danny offers Evelyn a shoulder to cry on. One thing leads to another. They have sex in a parachute hangar. But wait, Rafe is alive. Resurfacing mere days before the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, he learns after his months-long ordeal in occupied France that his best friend and the love of his life have turned the page after an extremely abbreviated mourning period. Then, Pearl Harbor happens. Breaks the tension, gives them all something else to think about. In the days after the attack, Danny and Rafe are assigned to what turns out to be a top-secret, near-suicidal retaliatory mission over Japan. Evelyn tells Rafe that she's pregnant with Danny's child and intends to stay with Danny, which Rafe accepts. She does not tell Danny. He doesn't learn until he's shot by Japanese soldiers, at which time he uses his dying breath to tell Rafe that he will now be the child's father. And so it goes. Rafe and Evelyn raise the boy. No prizes for guessing the kid's name. The banality of the plotting here, courtesy of the Braveheart screenwriter Randall Wallace, is self-evident and noted in nearly every review of Pearl Harbor, which opened, as all Bay films do, to poor notices and robust box office. But the truly damning detail, one that extends beyond the love triangle and into every other aspect of the film, is that Rafe and Danny are interchangeable. It doesn't matter whether Evelyn spends the rest of her life with one or the other. In fact, she doesn't have a choice. Maybe one is a better lover and the other more emotionally generous. Maybe she shares more interest with one than the other, or maybe there are differences in values or politics or preferred pizza toppings. Whatever particular qualities might separate these two humans are rendered so irrelevant, in fact, that Evelyn tells Rafe that she'll never look at another sunset without thinking of him. This despite the fact that it's Danny who sneaks her onto an airplane to see Pearl Harbor at sunset. These three are really into sunsets. There are plenty of occasions to point and laugh at one clunky romantic exchange or another. "You are so beautiful it hurts. It's your nose that hurts. No, it's my heart." But it's this flattening of human experience that defines the film, which folds a Texas grade school understanding of history into an Epcot theme park attraction. In Bay and producer Jerry Bruckheimer's blockbusterization of mass tragedy, war is not hell but an absolute blast, with hot nurses, picturesque locales, and aerial heroics so astounding that the president himself will pin a medal on your lapel. If Pearl Harbor feels like a recruitment film for a war that would happen about 5 months later in Afghanistan, that's not entirely by accident. Bruckheimer's Top Gun was a boon to the U.S. Navy in the mid-'80s, and there's little daylight between the flyboy machismo and militaristic adventure in that film and Rafe and Danny's theatrics in this one. To say nothing of the intense homoeroticism, Pearl Harbor is a love triangle in the truest sense. Evelyn and Danny are romantic rivals before they are romantic partners. And Titanic had laid to rest any concerns that human catastrophe was box office anathema too, so long as it could double as the backdrop for Love Story. Fidelity to history was a distant second to fidelity to box office formula. And yet, Bay remains an astonishing image maker. That truth can and should be qualified by any number of slanders about how those images are put together and what they signify. But the Bruckheimer School of Miller Time commercial stylists has never had a more prized pupil. It takes 90 minutes to get to 7th of December 1941, but the Pearl Harbor sequence is staged with a technical bravado that combines the bombast and pyrotechnics of Bay films like The Rock and Armageddon with shots of eerie beauty. Bay will never be confused for Terrence Malick, but there's a touch of the thin red line in the sight of Japanese fighter planes drifting past the lush greens and brilliant waters of Oahu at sunrise, an impending violation of the natural world. He even scales back his usual hyper-aggressive editing pace to give his pristine arrangements of planes and ships and bodies a little more room to breathe. Still, relatively speaking, the most devastating attack on U.S. soil doesn't look nearly as bad as it surely was. The PG-13 rating gives the film license to treat historic devastation from the bloodless distance of any other blockbuster action movie. And whenever Bay is forced to come in close, like following the chaos of Evelyn's hospital ward, he turns away like a child getting a shot. The blurred-out images are meant to suggest visceral panic, but their real intent is to shield the audience from any violence that might actually sicken them. And it's not just a ratings ploy either. Anyone who has seen the 1930 First World War classic All Quiet on the Western Front can testify to its unflinching horror. And besides, Bruckheimer and Bay only care about loss as a prelude to eventual triumph. Whether that's in the dogged efforts of Rafe and Danny to get their planes off the tarmac, or the mini-arc of the film's sole black character, Cuba Gooding Jr., to wrest himself out of the battleship kitchen and behind an anti-aircraft gun. When Rafe and Danny finally get a chance to have their revenge as part of the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, their intrepid leader, Alec Baldwin, sounding uncannily like Robert Stack in Airplane, likens it to a pinprick next to the sledgehammer of Pearl Harbor. But damned if the events are not given equal weight here. History is written by the victors, maybe an apocryphal phrase, but Bruckheimer and Bay were certainly not going to frame Pearl Harbor as a tragedy. Better to leave that to the losers and celebrate what happened after the sleeping giant was stirred from its slumber. The Japanese sneak attack on Pearl Harbor that brought the United States into World War II has inspired a splendid movie full of vivid performances and unforgettable scenes. A movie that uses the coming of war as a backdrop for individual stories of love, ambition, heroism, and betrayal. The name of that movie is From Here to Eternity. Pearl Harbor, the noisy, expensive, and very long new blockbuster from Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay, steals an occasional glance in the direction of Eternity, Fred Zinnemann's durable 1953 melodrama, adapted from James Jones's sprawling bestseller. A couple smooches in front of pounding Pacific surf, though they don't actually roll around in it, as did Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr. Military police officers break up a barroom fight. And since the movie is in ripe, lustrous color, the sun dresses and Hawaiian shirts look just fabulous. But Pearl Harbor has as little interest in character as it does, ultimately, in history. For all its epic pretensions, as if epic were a matter of running time, tumescent music, and earnest voiceover pronouncements, the movie works best as a bang-and-boom action picture, a loud symphony of bombardment and explosion juiced up with frantic editing and shiny computer-generated imagery. When John Voight appears as President Franklin D. Roosevelt, his face bloated with several pounds of prosthetic latex and his voice burnished into a patrician drawl, you half expect one of those inevitable action thriller unmaskings in which he peels off the rubber, climbs out of the wheelchair, and reveals himself to be Steven Seagal, ready to lay a smackdown on the treacherous Japanese. The film's reported budget was $135 million, which breaks down to roughly $45 million an hour. The bulk of the money seems to have been spent, and not too badly spent as these things go, on the long sequence devoted to the attack itself. The appearance of Japanese bombers buzzing in formation through the bright morning sunshine as housewives tend their clotheslines and children frolic on ball fields is meant to convey dread and impending menace. But after an hour of absurd lump-in-the-throat romanticism, the arrival of the enemy comes as something of a relief. The crashing of bombs and the whine of bullets at least pushes Hans Zimmer's oppressive score into the background, and in a further service to humanity, quiets the thundering bombast of Randall Wallace's dialogue. Nearly every line of the script drops from the actors' mouths with the leaden clank of exposition, timed with bad sitcom beats. According to the time-tested Bruckheimer formula, each heartfelt utterance must be soothed by a little joke. A moment of lightheartedness must resolve into a muffled choke of pathos. No shot seems to last more than 5 seconds. No scene more than a minute. People say only what is directly relevant to the movie's themes. If there are many more back home like you, a British officer tells one of the heroes, God help anyone who goes to war with America. The upstanding Yank tells him a bit later, we're not anxious to die, just anxious to matter. The main narrative concerns two boyhood chums, Rafe McCauley and Danny Walker, who after a brief boyhood idyll in Tennessee grow into dashing flyboys played by Ben Affleck and Josh Hartnett. Rafe is reckless and gallant, Danny a bit more shy. In 1941, they find themselves in a company of easily distinguished war movie types, the stutterer, the would-be Lothario, the dumb guy, and so on. In earlier, less self-conscious times, they would also have been sorted by ethnic and regional background. Their commander is Collar James Doolittle, one of a handful of real historical figures in the movie, played with a local news anchor's stentorian growl by Alec Baldwin, who seems ready to devour whatever materiel is left unscathed by the enemy's bombs. The flyers soon meet their female counterparts, a gaggle of nurses similarly typed for easy recognition. The fat one, the boy-crazy blonde, the shy girl with glasses, and so on. One of these, Evelyn Johnson, Kate Beckinsale, falls in love with Rafe after they meet cute during a physical exam. Suffering from what sounds like dyslexia, he is unable to sort out the letters on the eye chart, but after hearing his eloquent paean to his own flying skills, she passes him. Curiously, his disability does not interfere with his ability to read and write love letters once he and Evelyn are separated by the war. IMED to Memorial Day in 2001, Michael Bay unleashed a historical epic aimed to conquer the box office. Pearl Harbor, starring Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale, debuted to negative reviews but topped the holiday weekend chart, eventually raking in nearly $450 million worldwide. The Hollywood Reporter's original review is below. Theater owners, start your popcorn. Time to Memorial Day in 2001, Michael Bay unleashed a historical epic aimed to conquer the box office. Pearl Harbor, starring Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale, debuted to negative reviews but topped the holiday weekend chart, eventually raking in nearly $450 million worldwide. The Hollywood Reporter's original review is below. Theater owners, start your popcorn machines. Despite a filmmaking sensibility that will deeply divide audiences and inflame more than a few critics, Disney's Pearl Harbor nonetheless has the spectacle and subject matter to pull in general audiences for weeks. Stiff competition later in its run, however, will keep it from making a run for the record books. The $135 million production's unseasonable 3-hour running time includes many details of the December 7th, 1941, sneak attack by the Japanese Navy against U.S. forces in Hawaii that were missing in the last superproduction on the subject, Fox's Tora, released in 1970. Alas, both films are crippled by lengthy attention-wandering lead-ins to the attack, but there the similarities end. As directed by Michael Bay and written by Randall Wallace, Pearl Harbor strives to weave a story of personal dimensions into large historic events, but mostly tests one's patience with unseaworthy dialogue and performers drowning in oily cliches. Ben Affleck as an American pilot who can't wait to be a hero, and Kate Beckinsale as a Navy nurse who falls for him, are always photographed for maximum iconographic value, and it gets to be wearying. Their looks, her beguiling hairdo, his cocked hat, are all too cheerfully relied on when the dialogue that should draw one in just isn't there. This facilness continues, much to the film's cumulative downside, with the interludes with such historical figures as President Roosevelt, John Voight, and Admam Yamamoto, Mako, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack. The background of Japan's aggressions in Asia, America's reluctance to join the war in Europe, and Roosevelt's reactions to unfolding events are breezed through with as much ham-fisted efficiency as the torpedo bombers that killed so many sailors on Battleship Row. The famous lines are there about waking a sleeping giant and Day of Infamy, but then liberties are taken frequently to awkwardly interject information, even with such sacrosanct material as Roosevelt's speech to Congress on December 8, 1941. Quite dramatic, but rushed through like everything in the movie, the initial hour is centered on the courtship of Rafe, Affleck, and Evelyn, Beckinsale, who meet in 1940. A brash flyer whose boyhood friend Danny, Josh Hartnett, is assigned with him in an outfit run by the legendary aviator James H. Doolittle, Alec Baldwin, Rafe takes the idealistic step of volunteering for service with the British Royal Air Force in the heated period before isolationist America entered the war. The opening scenes, set during the 1920s, set up the relationship of Rafe and Danny when the former stands up to his friend's World War I traumatized father. Rafe's protecting of Danny is a recurring event. But when Danny and Evelyn drift together after Rafe is shot down and presumed dead, a future conflict is born. Both male characters are partly based on real-life pilots Kenneth Taylor and George Welch, who shot down 7 Japanese planes during the Pearl Harbor attack. Neither Taylor nor Welch participated in the Doolittle raid on April 18, 1942, which climaxes Pearl Harbor after Rafe unexpectedly returns from the dead, and the infamous surprise attack devastates the Pacific Fleet. There was no Macaulay or Walker among the 80 Toyko raiders either, but off they go to fly stripped-down B-25s on a possible suicide mission after an invitation from Doolittle. An attempt to both resolve the two flyboys' rivalry over Evelyn and show America's first significant blow in retaliation, Pearl Harbor soldiers on, with its themes of sacrifice and heroism reaching a climax in occupied China, where the raiders crash land and shoot it out with Japanese soldiers. In a disappointing stab at recreating the camaraderie and character conflicts of war films, a fair amount of screen time is devoted to groups of guys and, in the case of Evelyn, nurses. Few of these supporting players rise through the storytelling onslaught and attain a level of authenticity. Exceptions include Tom Sizemore as an airfield mechanic who helps Rafe and Danny get aloft during the attack. Another fairly prominent couple are Billy, William Lee Scott, and Betty, James King, one of the nurses caught in a terrifying strafing attack, one of the movie's best sequences. Cuba Gooding Jr. as the medal-winning mess assistant Doris "Dory" Miller on the USS West Virginia fares like most of the others. After an introduction scene showing him boxing and eventually whipping a big ugly sailor, Miller is doctored by Evelyn, and the shorthand dialogue is an example of the characters almost having foreknowledge of their destinies. Colm Feore as Pearl Harbor's wary Ad Kimmel and Dan Aykroyd's Captain Thurman, based on the real-life Captain Francis Lowe, an intelligence officer who comes up with the Doolittle raid idea, likewise have the gleam of history in their eyes. When it comes about 83 minutes into the movie, the 35-minute Pearl Harbor air raid recreation is unquestionably impressive filmmaking and will be luring viewers to the movie for a long time to come. Blowing up real ships, using real planes, and melding in Industrial Light and Magic produced enhancements, as well as massive sets like the hull of the capsized USS Oklahoma, the devastation is epic, and the flying sequences are an airplane buff's dream. But often the frantic pacing robs the viewer of closure on certain events. Meanwhile, though the toll on the unprepared Americans was staggering, the filmmakers shy away from blood and gore. One partly successful sequence, where Evelyn is faced with deciding which of the wounded to admit into the overwhelmed hospital, is needlessly punched up with blurry visuals to accentuate the chaos and soften the horror. While overall the film is a stirring tribute to the heroes and victims of the Pearl Harbor attack, there are many puzzling lapses in the striving for historical accuracy. Most egregious are many of the details regarding the Doolittle raid, particularly the seeming clumping of all the planes in one strike, and not even mentioning the other Japanese cities that were also bombed. The frantic launch of the B-25s off the pitching flight deck of the USS Hornet, much more compellingly shown in the 1944 classic 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, is a major missed opportunity. From such aggravating moments as not holding a shot of the exploding USS Arizona long enough to much bigger problems like Hans Zimmer's relentless blitzkrieg of forgettable music, Pearl Harbor thunders and bubbles with a distinctly contemporary approach to a subject that would scare away even the greatest of filmmakers. Bay and producer Jerry Bruckheimer are an army of two, and rather than uniting the audience in an experience never to be forgotten, they have pulled a sneak attack on history that everyone will see. 23 years after its release, Pearl Harbor still ranks as one of the most controversial and contested war movies ever made. With a blend of romance, action, and historical drama, Pearl Harbor captivated audiences upon its release in 2001. However, when the dust settled, a debate began over how accurately the movie portrayed the actual events of the attack. Comparisons between the film and the real-life attack reveal the movie's many historical inaccuracies. While Pearl Harbor offers dramatic flair and emotional narratives similar to the approach Titanic takes, the real story behind the attack provides a picture of the historical depth that the film glosses over in favor of Hollywood entertainment. While Pearl Harbor is undoubtedly an impressive cinematic accomplishment, it often sacrifices accuracy for spectacle. The 2001 film Pearl Harbor takes significant creative liberties with historical events, especially in its portrayal of the build-up to the infamous attack. One glaring inaccuracy is the depiction of U.S. Air Force members being part of the Eagle Squadron, an elite group of American volunteers flying for the Royal Air Force, RAF. In reality, only civilians were allowed to join the squadron by becoming members of the RAF. Affleck's character, Rafe McCauley, could not have participated in this squadron while being an active-duty U.S. Air Force member, as the film suggests, as that violates U.S. neutrality laws. Additionally, Macaulay's plane bears the insignia of the Polish No. 303 Squadron, a historical inaccuracy that disregards the distinction between different squadrons involved in the war. These misrepresentations may add drama to the film, but cause Pearl Harbor to deviate from historical truth. Another major discrepancy happens in one scene involving the Soviet Union. In this scene, Roosevelt discusses supplying Stalin with resources, but this is inaccurate for 1940, as Stalin was still allied with Hitler under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. This conversation misrepresents the political situation of the time, as the U.S. had not yet entered into any formal alliance with the Soviet Union. Additionally, Rafe's meeting with Navy nurse Evelyn during a medical examination is unlikely, as the Army had its own corps of nurses, and it's improbable that an Army pilot would be examined by Navy personnel. Also, while Pearl Harbor shows Evelyn taking a steam train to meet Rafe in New York, this is another anachronism. By 1940, most of the Long Island Railroad was electric, and steam trains were banned from Manhattan after the 1923 Kaufman Electrification Act. However, Pearl Harbor was not completely wrong. It does accurately convey the fact that the U.S. acted rather complacent and nonchalant before the attack, believing that Japan was not powerful enough to take them on, even with the growing tension. It does a decent job of displaying the initial lack of urgency displayed by the military, and it also depicts Japan sending diplomats to the United States to try and negotiate as a cover for the attack. Few historical events have shaped modern history as profoundly as the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The Japanese strike against the United States Pacific Fleet prompted the U.S. entry into World War II, altering the course of the war and of global history. Michael Bay's 2001 film Pearl Harbor sought to bring this pivotal moment to life through his signature blend of romance, action, and of course, spectacle. However, while Pearl Harbor delivered on Bay's vision, it failed at being an accurate portrayal of the attack. Numerous historical inaccuracies persist in this crucial sequence. For instance, Admiral Kimmel's reaction to the attack is misrepresented. The film shows Kimmel receiving notification of a Japanese submarine attack during the battle. In reality, he was informed hours after the attack had ended, not during the actual events. The film also heightens the tension by depicting Japanese bombers deliberately targeting hospitals, a claim that has no historical basis. These embellishments, while adding emotional weight, undermine the authenticity of the narrative. Pearl Harbor also makes significant errors in portraying U.S. Navy ships at Pearl Harbor. For instance, the movie shows the USS Missouri, an Iowa-class battleship that wasn't launched until 1944, despite the fact that the attack took place in 1941. Additionally, several scenes of the attack feature modern Spruance-class destroyers and other post-war vessels like the USS Whipple, launched in 1968, which have no place in a World War II setting. Likewise, the Japanese fleet is riddled with inaccuracies. At one point, the movie shows the Japanese task force approaching Hawaii using modern American nuclear aircraft carriers and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. While the number of carriers eventually shown is correct, the constant switching between modern U.S. ships and World War II-era Japanese ships throughout the sequence is jarring and inconsistent. Although the final scene of the task force includes a decent representation of carriers like the IJN Hiryu and Akagi, the film's earlier mistakes undermine the authenticity of these moments. Yet, Pearl Harbor continues to do some things correctly. The movie does a good job of showing the heroism of the soldiers involved, even if it does focus on the made-up characters instead of real-life soldiers. It also shows the attack, which was a strategy the Japanese used during the war. Also, while the ships used in the depiction of Battleship Row are not historically accurate, the film did a good job of showing the strategy employed and the destruction caused during the Pearl Harbor attack. One of the most contentious aspects of Pearl Harbor is its decision to place a love triangle at the center of the narrative. The romantic subplot involving Rafe, Ben Affleck, Evelyn, Kate Beckinsale, and Danny, Josh Hartnett, consumes a large portion of the film's runtime, even though it has no bearing on the events of the attack. Pearl Harbor's love story is purely fictional and bears no resemblance to any real events during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The focus on this dramatic storyline makes for a fun watch. However, romance is not a key part of the history of Pearl Harbor. As stated by Richard H. Manair, retired professor of history at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, Another important aspect to consider is how Pearl Harbor portrays women's roles during this period. Evelyn and the other female characters serve primarily as romantic interests or emotional anchors for the male leads, which typically was not the case in history. In reality, women were absolutely essential during World War II. As with the majority of men participating in the war to some extent, women had to serve as not only nurses during the war, but they also had to fill in the employment gaps left behind. However, Pearl Harbor did do a good job of depicting accurate romances for the time. The romances are interesting to watch, even if it wasn't a major part of the history of the event. The characters' speech, actions, and romantic gestures align much more with the time period than they do with modern romances, and while the dialogue is sometimes quite wooden, it fits the time period well. Following the attack, the United States formally entered World War II, changing the tide of the international battle. President Franklin D. Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech, rallying the nation and leading to a massive mobilization of U.S. military forces. In Pearl Harbor, however, the aftermath of the attack avoids much of the international and political implications of the war, instead focusing on the personal struggles of the main characters. Pearl Harbor also botches the military campaign it presents. Most notably, Pearl Harbor's egregious representation of the Doolittle raid, which many historians agree is completely inaccurate. John McManus, professor of military history at the Missouri University of Science and Technology, stated, "Okay, where to begin? This one's just so bad. I'm sorry. I mean, way too much destruction." He continues by criticizing the depiction of the raid, which places fictional characters Rafe and Danny in a highly dramatized version of history. This downplays the real soldiers' contributions to what was one of the boldest American military actions of World War II. The movie's portrayal of the Doolittle raid is not only romanticized, but factually inaccurate. While the film focuses on Tokyo as the main target, the real raid included several other industrial centers. The movie also misrepresents the launch point, claiming it was 624 miles from Japan when it was actually 650 miles. Additionally, Pearl Harbor omits one of the most interesting details. The raiders' leather jackets were inscribed with Chinese characters asking for assistance after the mission. Pearl Harbor simplifies the complexities of the raid, causing the film to sacrifice historical accuracy and diminish the real heroism of those involved. Pearl Harbor, which is an awful hot girl. The ballad contains other common criticisms of the film, concluding with the rhetorical question, why does Michael Bay get to keep on making movies? The 2004 film Churchill, The Hollywood Years, a satire on the Hollywood take on history, references the portrayal of the American contribution to the Battle of Britain early in Pearl Harbor soundtrack. The soundtrack to Pearl Harbor on Hollywood Records was nominated for the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Score. Moulin Rouge won the original score was. Composed by Hans Zimmer, the song There You'll Be was nominated for the Academy Award and Golden Globe Award for Best Original Song. Pearl Harbor Movie Review, Pearl Har. Horror is a 2-hour movie squeezed into 3 hours about how on Deck 7, 1941, the Japanese staged a surprise attack on an American love triangle. Its centerpiece is 40 minutes of redundant special effects surrounded by a love story of stunning banality. The film has been directed without grace, vision, or originality, and although you may walk out quoting lines of dialogue, it will not be because you admire them. The filmmakers seem to have aimed the film at an audience that may not have heard of Pearl Harbor or perhaps even of World War II. This is the Our Weekly Reader. Version if you have the slightest knowledge of the events in the film, you will know more than it can tell you there is no sense of history, strategy, or context according to this movie. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor because America cut off its oil supply and they were down to an 18-month reserve, wood going to war to store the fuel sources. Did they perhaps also have imperialist designs? Movie doesn't say so shaky as the film's history that at the end when Jimmy Dit Tokyo Raiders crash land in China, they're shot at by Japanese patrols with only a murky throwaway. Explanation about the Sino-Japanese War already underway. I predict some viewers will leave the theater sincerely confused about why there were Japanese in China. As for the movie's portrait of the Japanese themselves, it is so oblique that Japanese audiences will find little to complain about. apart from the fact that they play such a small role in their own. There are several scenes where the Japanese high command debates military tactics, but all of their dialogue is strictly expository. They state facts but do not emerge with personalities or passions only. Admiral Yamamoto Mako is seen as an individual, and his dialogue seems to have been singled out with the hindsight of history congratulated on a brilliant raid. He demurs a brilliant man would find a way not to fight a war. And later, I fear, all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant. Do you imagine at any point the Japanese high command engaged in the 1941 Japanese equivalent of exchanging high fives and shouting yes while pumping their fists in the air? Not in this movie, where the Japanese seemed to have been melancholy, even at the time, about the regrettable need to play such a negative role in such a positive Hollywood film. The American side of the story centers on two childhood friends from Tennessee, with the standard issues screenplay names Ray M. Cobb, Ben Newland, Danny Walker, Josh Hartman. They enter the Army Air Corps and both fall in love with the same nurse, Evelyn Johnson. Kate Beckinsale first Ray falls for her. And then after, he's reported Deb Danny. Their first date is subtitled 3 months later and ends with Danny having apparently read the subtitle telling, Evelyn, don't let it be 3 months before I see you again. Okay, that gets almost as big a laugh as her line to Wraith. I'm going to give Danny my whole heart, but I don't think I'll ever look at another sunset without thinking of you. That kind of bad laugh would have been sidestepped in a more literate screenplay. But our hopes are not high. After an early newsreel report that the Germans are bombing in downtown London, a difficult target, since although there is such a place as central London, at no time in 2,000 years has London ever had anything described by anybody as a downtown. There is not a shred of conviction or chemistry in the love triangle, which results after Rafe returns alive to Hawaii shortly before the raid on Pearl Harbor and is angry at EVN for falling in love with Danny, inspiring her timeless line. I didn't even know until the day you turned up alive. And then all this happened. Evelyn is a hero in the aftermath of the raid, performing triage by using her lipstick to separate the wounded who should be treated from those left to die in a pointless stylistic. Choice director Michael Bay and cinematographer John Schwartzman shoot some of the hospital scenes in soft focus, some in sharp focus. Some blurred. Why, I understand it's to obscure details deemed too gory for the PG-13 rating. Why should the carnage at Pearl Harbor be toned down to PG-13 in the first place in the news? Real sequences. The movie fades in and out of black and white with almost amusing haste, while the newsreel announcer sounds not like a period voice, but like a top 40 DJ in an echo chamber. The most involving material in the film comes at the end when Jimmy Dewitt Alec Baldwin leads his famous raid on Tokyo flying Army bombers off the decks of Navy carriers and hoping to crash land in China. He and his men were here. Heroes, and their story would make a good movie, and indeed has 30 seconds over Tokyo. Another hero in the movie is the African-American cook Dory Miller, Cuba Gooding Jr., who because of his race was not allowed to touch a gun in the racist pre-war Navy, but opens fire during the raid, shoots down 2 planes, and saves the life of his captain. He's shown getting a medal, nice to see an African-American in the movie, but the almost total absence of Asians in 1941. Hawaii is inexplicable. As for the raid itself, a little goes a long way. What is the point? Really, of more than half an hour of planes bombing ships, of explosions and fireballs of roars on the soundtrack and bodies flying through the air and people running away from fighters that are strafing them? How can it be entertaining or moving when it's simply about the most appalling slaughter? Why do the filmmakers think we want to see this unrelieved by intelligence viewpoint or insight? It was a terrible, terrible day. 3,000 died. And all this is not a movie about them. Other information about this. Film the bombs explode brilliantly, but the story is a bust in Pearl Harbor. Except for the central 40-minute attack sequence, which combines razzle-dazzle pyrotechnics with high-grade visual effects to deliver the destructive spectacle people want to see. This $140 million Jerry Bruckheimer, Michael B. World War Roman II extravaganza features a script that Jack Warner would have found wanting even for a propaganda melorat at the time, along with a cast perfectly in tune with its shallowness resulting 3-hour opus which plays out from here to what seems like eternity isn't bad enough to keep the public from flocking to it in the kind of numbers that will support its seemingly preordained status as the noon film of the summer, but for all the coin the picture will generate, the tepid love triangle hardly seems like one that audiences will genuinely and warmly embrace, although not willfully inaccurate in its account of Japan's surprise attack on the Hawaiian home base of the United States Pacific Fleet on the morning of Deck 7, 1941. The event that triggered Uncle Sam's entry into the war more than 2 years after it began. Randall Wallace's screenplay takes a classic's illustrated fifth-grade approach to one of 20th century history most literally explosive moments. Preferring to recycle standard-issue inspirational cliches from the period rather than to delve into the many fascinating elements that led to the clash, P represents the anti-historical approach Hollywood seems to think the modern public prefers, with Titanic clearly serving as its artistic and neat financial model. Pearl Harbor seeks to honor all those who selflessly dedicated and in many cases sacrificed themselves for their country. But the characters, even given the ample opportunity of such protracted running time, don't exhibit any traits other than noble patriotism. In romantic distress, what the viewer is left with are visions of staggering action, conflict, and tragedy played out on the grandest of possible canvases, but with no one you know or care about to emotionally pull you into the events. Watching the 350 Japanese fighters and bombers blast away at American ships and personnel in something close to real time is arresting and vivid, but it's not wrenching or breathtaking or heart-stopping. You think more about what it took to put it on screen rather than being swept up in it. What prevents the attack from packing its full punch are the 80 minutes of dreariness that precede it all. We'll ever know about Rafe Emskie. And Danny Walker is what we learn in the prologue, that they've been best friends since their cornpone youths in Tennessee and have never wanted to do anything but fly. They get their chance in 1941 when they undergo some very top gunnish flight training on Long Island, which is here miraculously graced by some imposing mountain backdrops. But their paths diverge when the impatient Rafe Ben All volunteers for the English Eagle Squadron, while Danny Josh Hartnett remains stateside before leaving. The somewhat goofy, self-deprecating Rafe has an intense few weeks in New York with Evelyn. Kate Beckinsale, a comely nurse, who charms him by giving him a few sharp pokes in the backside and overlooking the fact that he can't make sense of the eye chart. EVN Rafe decides is the girl for him. Meanwhile, Danny and EVN have ended up in Ballahu, where military service repped a sort of precursor to Club Med, even as the perceived Japanese threat was building. Pig acknowledges for about 5 seconds that there was Japanese espionage going on in the area, and for about 10 seconds that American authorities were divided over what Japan might do and how best to prepare for it, but entirely ignores the fascinating social, racial, political dynamic on the islands at the time, nor does it take advantage of this lull before the storm to develop the characters in any interesting ways. Evelyn and her fellow nurse girlfriends remain narrowly. Man moth guys Danny pals around with are equally one-dimensional, and another man, Doris Dory Miller, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., gets maybe 10 minutes of screen time. To illustrate how blacks were subordinated in the segregated Navy of the time to menial jobs, Danny and an initially reluctant Evelyn are brought together in a union, consummated in a swirl of photogenic white parachutes, but faster than you can say a guy named Joe, who should turn up but Rafe ready for action in more ways than one. After a bomb brawl, the guys have just acknowledged that they have no idea how they'll ever be able to see eye to eye again when the Japanese provide them with an answer out of the blue. Although never pretending to do justice to the Japanese side, Allah Tora, 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 neither does Pearl Harbor wish to offend one of the world's biggest markets, so it makes do with brief formal scenes of Nippon's officers. Principally, the attacks form Ulator and chief proponent Admiral Yamamoto Mako, making subtitled pronouncements about the United States oil embargo having given them little choice but to go to. War overall treatment of the Japanese is reasonably respectful and non-inflammatory, given that they are still the bad guys herein. There are several references to the Japs, but never anything worse. Rather, the film reserves its most vigorous sanitization efforts to the almost total elimination of cigar eats from a military scene in which nearly everyone smoked the same. Revisionism applied in Saving Private Ryan, and it's ludicrous after the prolonged and frequently tedious build-up, but misses another bet by refusing to permit a few minutes of quiet before the early morning skies fill with roaring zeros Cates and Bow's few settings offer. A more alluring vision of earthly paradise than Hawaii, and it seems perverse not to allow the audience to take a few deep if uneasy breaths before the main event, but while it is not as compulsively frenetic as it was in Armageddon, Bau's filmmaking style is still defined by relentless cutting and grandiose camera moves and this seemingly ingrained inability to hold any shot more than a few seconds. Actually works against one of the prime goals of a war film to present a coherent sense of logistics, the geographic relationship of one force versus another. It also ill serves the like. Epic style when dozens of Japanese planes zoom down a long valley from the north toward Pearl Harbor. One wants to go. Behold the unique spectacle at length to let its horrific majesty become imprinted on the brain. The attack, then, is spectacular but not rousing the physical. Verisimilitude is unimpeachable. A few explosions to the side. The sequence avoids the usual CGI look, and the combination of roaring, planes swirling, smoke splattering, bulls scurrying, soldiers, fallen men, desperate nurses, and sinking boats creates a strong image of desperate chaos and confusion and fills the screen with visceral incident in the midst of all the destruction. The beginnings of American resistance are seen in the commandeering by Wraith and Danny of two fighter planes which engage the Japanese in dogfights that see 70 bite the dust, and eventually inspire Jimmy, diddle Alec Baldwin, to select the two buddies to join him 4 months later on his famous bombing raid on Tokyo. Casting reminds of a Warner Bros. War drama for which they couldn't get Humphrey Bogart or Errol Flynn, so they went with George Raft or George Brent instead. Rafe is supposed to suffer from deep emotional hurt, but the blandly handsome Al couldn't convince that he'd ever so much as been turned down for a date, much less lost the love of his life to his best friend Hartnett. Comes off as a tag-along kid, while Beckinsale is all fancy cure and thick lipstick in a role that is startlingly undefined. Just compare their superficiality to the complex characters, and what's missing here becomes terribly clear. Lenser John Schwartzman goes for the hard-edged, contrasty look of 40 Studio Productions, to sometimes interesting, sometimes obvious effect, although the film never takes on a thick atmosphere of its own. Score is usually overbearing, coming from Hans Zimmer, with echoes of a gladiator bouncing around throughout. Positive elements. Rafe and Danny are loyal friends willing to die for one another. Both display a strong sense of duty and a willingness to risk danger to fight evil. A group of pilots, when given the opportunity to back out of what is most probably a suicide mission, all volunteer to remain. Rafe respects Evelyn and refuses to participate, in PR sex soldiers and airmen risk death to fight the enemy and to save each other. A Navy captain goes out of his way to compliment an African-American cook who suffers under the racism of the day. A soldier lets the woman he loves stay in a relationship with another man because he knows it's best for her. One pilot gives his life to save another diddle. Says there's nothing stronger than the heart of a volunteer. Also in 1941, most Americans still believed in the institution of marriage, and Pearl Harbor reflects that spiritual content. A Navy Chaplain urges a badly wounded man, hold on to your faith. Son, he reminds another of Jesus' words today, you will be with me in paradise. When the man dies, the love. Chaplain says, go with God, my son. A priest gives last rites to dead sailors. An American pilot crosses himself before taking off his mission. Commander asks, when did you find religion? When you assigned me to this mission. He responds, then pray for both of us. The mission commander says a pilot who is shot down relates how when he thought he was going to die, he made a deal with God to be allowed to live. I kept my end of the best bargain, he says. A flirtatious and irreverent nurse quips after a church service, I just had my slate wiped clean. Now I can think about how I can dirty it up again. A soldier looking around at the utter destruction asks, where is God in all this? President Roosevelt, speaking of his being confined to a wheelchair because of polio, says God brought him down to that level so that he could better understand God's will. On the other hand, Japanese pilots prayed to their ancestors. Before a Shinto shrine sexual content, a soldier gives advice on how to seduce. The nurses joke among themselves about seeing men in their underwear, and one comment, saw a soldier's cute butt after she gave him an inoculation. Audiences also see a couple of cute butts along the way. A nurse looks forward to making out another nurse says to a soldier, tonight you're mine. Rafe, when tempted to take Evelyn up to a hotel room, decides not to. I can't do this. He says it's not right. I don't want anything to regret later. That's what I want to come home to. A mechanic berates a pilot who is painting the figure of a barely clad woman on the nose of a bomber. I don't want anyone painting breasts on my airplane. A woman wears a low-cut night gown. Others wear bikinis. A soldier comments, don't you think if your best friend was doing your girl that you wouldn't come back and beat the crap out of him? There's one scene of implied sex between a soldier and nurse, although nothing about the depiction is explicit. The next day, when the soldier says to her, I'm not sorry, she replies, I don't know, it's too fast, the results of that. Liaison are portrayed neutrally, violent content, while the film features intense battle scenes. The violence is not nearly as explicit or gruesome as in the film. It is likely to be compared with Saving Private Ryan. Men are blown up by torpedoes and bombs, others are engulfed in flames. Japanese planes straight, sailors in the water, and men running across a runway. Japanese and American. Planes are shot down and crash into buildings or ships. Sailors drown in a flooding engine room, badly burned, and wounded men stagger toward a hospital. Blood spurts across a nurse's white uniform, and a jumble of dead bodies is lifted out of the water in a cargo net. Survivors of the Doit bombing raid on Tokyo engage in a close firefight with Japanese troops. A pilot is assigned a plane whose pilot was killed and whose blood is still splattered across the canopy. Elsewhere, soldiers engage in a bar fight and participate in a dirty boxing match at the beginning of the movie. Danny's abusive dad slaps him. Around, Rafe comes to the rescue by whacking the dad across the head with a plank. Crude or profane language, the Lord's name is abused more than 20 times. Other profanities, including the WW, are used at least that often. American soldiers call the Japanese Japs, and during a boxing match, a sailor utters a racial epithet aimed at an African-American drug and alcohol content. Alcohol and tobacco get a lot of screen time. Soldiers and their girls drink beer in bar and clubs. Sailors salute each other with shots of whiskey. Men drink martinis, some soldiers smoke, and one hands out victory cigars. Japanese soldiers toast their upcoming raid. Other negative elements. Both Rafe and Danny are willing to break the rules, starting with Raf's use of a cheat sheet during the eye exam. He later tells a nurse, I know I'm a bad influence, as he steals a boat to take her on a harbor cruise. Danny disobeys Regis by taking Evan for a spin in his fighter, Sailors. Play dice and wager on a boxing match. The Americans are understandably enraged by the Japanese sneak attack. But talk of fighting back often turns to crude talk of revenge conclusion. As a military history buff, I was pleased to see a mostly accurate account of the attack on Pearl Harbor with only a few liberties. taken for the sake of the story, but I was upset that the Japanese admirals and generals are portrayed as having had no choice but to attack the American fleet. This story disagrees. Besides, many of their comments and actions are far removed from the context of the day in the movie. A Japanese gunner seeing children near the area where the attack is to begin, trees to motion the kids to safety in reality. American soldiers were keenly aware of the glee exhibited by some of the attacking pilot. The bombing in the movie was the way it happened. Remembers Pearl Harbor veteran Daniel S. Crutcher. But it seems the way the pilots were portrayed left a bit to be desired. They came down to 40 to 50 feet. You could see the mustaches on their faces. Not only that, but the grins as well. I was expecting 21st century morality to be grafted onto 1941, think Titanic, but for the most part, the men and women in this movie behave as they do in movies from that era still. Pearl Harbor is without question intense, and the soap opera subplot is problematic more than once, not to mention the profane language. So do the overall historical message of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice fully compensate. No swim carefully in this harbor entertainment zeros are lurking. What you need to know in the World War Roman II extravaganza Pearl Harbor Benall. And Josh Hartnett star as two childhood buddies, Rafe and Danny, who joined the United States Air Force at the dawn of World War. Tu Rai falls in love with a Navy nurse, Evelyn, but goes away to join an American squadron of volunteer pilots in England when his plane crashes. In the sea, Rafe is presumed drowned 3 months later in Pearl Harbor. Evelyn is still pining for Rafe when she decides to give her heart to Danny, who's also been assigned to Pearl. Their love affair is interrupted by Raf's sudden reappearance and by explosive world events as Japan finally attacks the American fleet. Pearl Harbor is a love letter to the brotherhood of heroes who survived the deadly Japanese attack on Deck 7, 1941, and went on to defeat. Triumph is a sometimes hokey love triangle and a Saturday matina tale of youthful heroics not always successful. Pearl Harbor is still a spectacular, redemptive piece of filmmaking. Regrettably, it contains plenty of foul language and some implied sexual immorality content, moral worldview with strongly patriotic and solidly Christian redemptive elements undermined by mild revisionist history, mostly meant to move story along and provide stereotypical entertainment, romantic elements, and worst of all, some pagan elements including foul language, sexual immorality, an image of Japanese Buddhist shrine, about 32 obscenities, 11 strong profanities, and 18 mild profanities, lots of action, and war violence with slight BL blood, including explosions, gunfire, planes chasing one another, boats sinking, planes crashing, and men drowning, plus some intense hospital scenes, including fornication, partial nudity, alcohol use, smoking, and revenge and lust. More detail. Pearl Harbor is a love letter to the brotherhood of heroes who survived the deadly Japanese attack on Hawaii on Deck 7, 1941, and went on to defeat the forces of National Socialism in Japan. Interwoven within this mythic story of tragedy and triumph is a sometimes hokey love triangle between two pilots and a nurse, and a Saturday MAA tale of youthful heroics. Benall and Josh Hartnett star as two childhood buddies, Rafe Mackey and Danny Walker, who dream of flying. They joined the United States Air Force at the dawn of World War II. Rafe falls in love with a Navy nurse, Evelyn Johnson, played by Kate Beckinsale, but goes away to join an American squadron of volunteer pilots in England fighting the Germans when his plane crashes in the sea. Rafe is presumed drowned 3 months later in Pearl Harbor. Evelyn is still pining for Rafe when she meets Danny, who's also been assigned to Pearl. Cautiously, the two young people console themselves over the loss of their friend by falling in love. A night of passion leaves Evelyn pregnant on the eve of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Rafe suddenly appears after hiding from the Germans in occupied France. His sudden reappearance sets off a chain reaction of emotions, interrupted by explosive world events, as Japan finally sends its pilots to destroy the American fleet at Pearl. Pearl Harbor is immensely satisfying as a spectacle and as an historical reenactment of the early days of World War War II director Michael Bay, Armageddon, and his team do a spectacular job of recreating the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Do-It bombing raid on Tokyo in the spring of 1942. The movie is a little bit flat. However, in its depiction of the love triangle and in the youthful heroics displayed by its two main heroes, the dialogue in the script and the twists and turns of the story could use some touching up, if not rethinking. It's all somewhat predictable at times, though the actors seem to do the best they can with the material. A subplot involving a black Navy cook played wonderfully by Cuba Gooding Jr. helps relieve these problems. Also helping greatly, of course, is the incredible verisimilitude which the filmmakers apply to their subject. Pearl Harbor contains some solid moral Christian and redemptive elements combined with the usual American patriotism, which Michael Bay seems to apply to some of his movies. For example, although his friend Danny makes the opposite decision, Rafe decides to keep his affair with Evelyn chaste. The movie rewards his efforts in the end, which seems to validate his good moral stance. Thus, although Pearl Harbor plays like the sexually immoral movie Titanic, at times it skirts around this lack of moral purity in the end. The ending to Pearl Harbor is redemptive in other ways, which will be left unsaid so as not to spoil it for potential viewers despite these positive aspects to Pearl Harbor's worldview. The movie includes plenty of foul language, although there are no forward or really filthy sexual language. There are about 32 obscenities and 11 strong exclamatory profanities. The movie also includes a scene of implied fornication and scenes where it's clear that the soldiers and nurses have some lustful plans on their minds, unlike other recent war movies. However, the war violence in Pearl Harbor is not extremely bloody and gruesome. It still manages to be sufficiently tragic in that respect. We hope Pearl Harbor lights the way toward more responsible and more interesting filmmaking from Hollywood. This film, directed by Michael Bay. Written by Randall Wallace, produced by Jerry Bromer. Michael Bay, starring Ben Yule, Josh Hartman, Kate Beckinsale, Cuba Gooding Jr., Tom Seymour, John Voight, F. Alec Baldwin, cinematography. John Schwartzman, edited by Chris Levinson, Mark Goldblatt, Steven Rosenblum, Roger Barton, music by Hans Zimmer Production Companies, Touchstone Pictures, Jerry Bruckheimer Films, distributed by Vista Pictures. Distribution release dates May 21st, 2001. In Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, May 25th, 2001 in mainland United States. Running time 183 minutes. Country United States languages. English Japanese budget $140 million, box office $44.92 million. So guys, this is the review of Pearl Harbor movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video,